Vulnerability is definitely an attractive quality for men, but vulnerability also gets kind of a bad rap when it comes to guys presenting it. And there's a handful of reasons. There's actually several reasons for this. Reason number one, vulnerability for a lot of guys is seen as a sign of weakness. It's not. Vulnerability is a sign actually that you are comfortable and confident enough to open yourself up and invite someone else to connect with you. You can't be vulnerable and be yourself unless you have achieved a certain level of confidence where you know that you can take rejection, you can take criticism, you can take disagreement, you can take somebody wanting to go a different way than you. If you're able to be vulnerable and then allow someone to disagree with you, that's a sign of really deep, relaxed confidence that you want to have inside of you. Another thing is a lot of guys, when they're being vulnerable, will overdo it. So this is kind of the second problem a little bit with vulnerability with guys is you're overdoing the vulnerability. I believe the word we use a lot now is trauma dumping. So, you go to share something about your childhood or your past relationships or something that you're working on, and you go way overboard. That's not vulnerability. That is backing up the dump truck, and then just dumping it all out on somebody. That's beyond vulnerability. Vulnerability is opening up and letting someone into your life. If you're taking what's inside of you and dumping it out like a bucket onto somebody, that is, I guess, maybe a form of neediness. There might be a certain lack of structure inside of yourself in being able to maintain and hold your own issues, and maintain your own responsibility for it. When you're being vulnerable, you need to be selective. You need to ask yourself, how long have I known this person? How much is appropriate for me to share with them? And realize that as things are going well, you'll share more and more over time. There's no rush in the vulnerability. You share a little bit and then you save the rest for another time. So yeah, when you are being vulnerable, don't overdo it. I'd say maybe a third item when it comes to vulnerability is you want to make sure that you're putting it out there. Vulnerability, you're creating an opening on your end, you're putting it out there. And at the end of that vulnerable statement, of that vulnerable opening, there's an invitation. The invitation is for the other person to reciprocate in their vulnerability towards you. Here's the thing, it's an invitation, not an expectation, not a demand. You're not making a request of them to be vulnerable in exchange. Being vulnerable, and particularly if you're the one being vulnerable first, that's very bold. That's very confident as a man. And whoever's being vulnerable first usually has the tougher job. I see it as a very masculine thing to do, to be vulnerable first. Women inherently feel more vulnerability throughout life in all different areas. Sexually, health-wise, physically, they're on average much smaller than men. They're not as strong as men. Women experience a certain amount of vulnerability across the board far more than men do. It's my understanding that because whoever goes first in being vulnerable is being more vulnerable, that's actually the guy's role because it balances out the scales. If a woman is inherently feeling more vulnerability than a man in life, and then she puts herself out there first and is more vulnerable or is vulnerable before he is, that creates an even larger mismatch. It's even more imbalanced. I think it's the guy's job to approach the woman. That's a vulnerability. Sharing some of your feelings, your intentions, that's being vulnerable. And then as you get to know each other and you start sharing some of your deeper feelings and some of your own things that you're working on, that's another level of vulnerability. I think it's incredibly masculine for the man to do that first and then invite the woman to reciprocate if and how and when she's ready. So when you're being vulnerable, don't expect the woman or any person really to reciprocate. Put an invitation at the end of it. The other thing I want to say about vulnerability is absolutely the one core component of connection with people. We talk a lot about how we're so disconnected in our society, how everyone's isolated, how we want to have connection, but it's not there. Vulnerability is the one indispensable component of connection. And when I extend my own vulnerability towards someone else, that's an invitation to experience connection with them. And then their connection back towards me, That's up to them whether or not they want to reciprocate. If they do, fabulous. Then we've started some connection between us. If they choose not to, well, I'm going to go on about my life and find other people that I'm interested in extending my vulnerability to see if we can have the connection. Because in order to have connection with two people, you need a two-way direction of vulnerability. I have to be vulnerable toward them, and they have to be vulnerable towards me. When both people have vulnerability towards each other, that is the basic foundation of connection. If only one person is being vulnerable, this is what happens a lot in relationships. One person is being vulnerable and the other person is playing it safe. They're staying behind their wall. They're being reluctant to share anything. There's no connection happening between those two people. When both of us start being vulnerable and saying what we're really thinking, we're saying what we're really feeling, almost immediately, we start to feel connected. And when we start to feel connected, a lot of times the conflict, the arguments, the being on two different sides fighting it out, they just release and we start feeling connection again. So yeah, vulnerability for guys is a tricky subject. I think it has a really bad rap of being a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of weakness. It's honestly a sign that you are solid enough in yourself to open the doors, extend an invitation, and then accept whether or not somebody wants to reciprocate. That's really what I have to say about vulnerability. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you again later. Bye.